all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 93. Asgard Immortal Palace. After Loki saw Chen Tian's safe and sound posture through the perspective of the destroyer, Fang Kai's angry expression suddenly froze on his face. The angry and roaring voice stopped abruptly. It seemed that an invisible big hand suddenly pinched his neck, not only making him unable to say anything tilde. Even breathing became uncontrollably heavy. He resisted the destroyer's rays. It can even be said that it has not been affected in the slightest. This guy. Loki felt his voice tremble a little. Is this guy really from Midgard? Joke. The destroyer's so-called one of Asgard's most powerful weapons, the power it displays, is that Loki, as a god, does not dare to resist. And that guy not only went in and carried down, but didn't even hurt at all. Loki couldn't even help but doubt his eyes over and over again at this moment. The other side. Atrium of the Nine Realms, Earth. Thor witnessed this scene, his mouth open and silent for a long time. Not sure what to say. Last second. Still letting Chen Tian dodge away, otherwise he will die at the hands of the destroyer. I didn't expect that only a few seconds had passed. Thor's face was smacked. Chen, how did you do it? Thor came back to his senses and muttered incredulously. That's the destroyer's strongest blow. Even when he still had divine power, he didn't dare to face it head on. But Chen Tian just stood in place, and didn't even seem to make any movement at all, just letting the destroyer's beam bombard his body. And not injured at all. Even the clothes on his body did not affect the slightest. Such a scene, even for Thor, the Grand Prince of Asgard, was extremely shocking. Meanwhile, always hiding in the distance. There is no departing Jane Foster, looking at Chen Tian, who seemed to be floating in the sky like a god. A small mouth also opened in shock, and its eyes straightened. This Chen, is it really human? No wonder the people of Xield were so afraid of him last night. I have already imagined what would have happened if the people of Xield dared to do something to him at that time. She couldn't help but mumble. Although Jane Foster has no specific idea of how terrifying the destroyer is. But, after the arrival of the destroyer, the damage caused was also seen by her. The beam that this guy just shot out easily destroyed a quarter of the town. Such power is undoubtedly impossible for ordinary people to bear. And even if anything else, the aura exuded by Chen Tian alone was enough to make people feel deeply oppressed. Thinking simple, Foster's gaze towards Chen Tian became more and more complicated. He was also more and more in awe, and Vandal, one of the three warriors of the Immortal Palace, looked at Chen Tian's back and was even more awe-inspiring. He's a real fighter. His eyes flickered and he couldn't help but exclaim. Meanwhile, Loki, who was manipulating the destroyer, turned into irritation over time. He felt that he had lost face, and was so humiliated by a lowly Midgard. The feminine and handsome face suddenly became more and more distorted. Damn guys, quote. Do you really think that this will really challenge the power of the gods? I tell you, no way. He roared angrily and raised his hand again, ready for the destroyer to attack. One by one, in the gap in the body of the destroyer of the earth, a crimson brilliance once again lit up, and the majestic energy was once again ready to gather in the head. Yet the next second. Phew. Chen Tian's figure suddenly exploded, and the air around him that had just begun to heat up was all pulled by his high-speed movement that turned into an afterimage, turning into a fierce wind. He came to the destroyer in an instant. Superpower burst out and suddenly threw his own punch. Rumble. The majestic power suddenly exploded under his punch. The surrounding air was directly blasted out of a vacuum with his punches. The endless winds suddenly rolled up and swept in all directions. And the destroyer received a heavy punch in the chest in the front, and the chest armor, which should have been extremely strong, suddenly twisted and collapsed. And the entire behemoth body was even blasted off the ground and flew out thousands of meters away. Boom. Pieces of building complexes were destroyed one after another under the collapse of the behemoth body of the destroyer, and the rubble splashed into the sky. Chen Tian, on the other hand, looked at the destroyer who fell in the ruins and shook his head. It seems that this destroyer, without the blessing of Odin's power, is not the same thing as the destroyer who blocked the celestial god group alone. It's a world of difference. He recalled the oppressive feeling cast on Odin's previous sky projection. Can't help but mumble in my heart. And Loki's continuous attacks really made Chen Tian feel a little displeased. At the same time, he was also a little impatient. After all, the purpose this time was the bloodline of Thor, the god of thunder. No time to spend time with the destroyer. However, it seems that all this is arranged by Odin today. If I forcibly intervene and cause Thor's death, will he also reawaken the power of Thor? Between thoughts, Chen Tian set his eyes on Thor. The latter felt the gaze projected on him by the other party and frowned slightly. Thor always felt that his eyes were wrong when he looked at him, and his heart bristled. The other side. Simple. Foster's fancy friend next to him, Louise's charming face showed a smile, and asked Thor, that flying little brother is your friend? Quote. As he spoke, he could feel a charm of spring water dripping out from his eyes. Thor didn't speak. If he hadn't seen Chen Tian's terrifying performance now, he would naturally not hesitate to say that the other party was his friend for the drinking friends who had drunk together. But now, Thor wasn't even sure what Chen Tian's gaze meant by looking at him. In short, he faintly felt that Chen Tian seemed to have some kind of evil thoughts about himself. And just when Thor's thoughts had not fallen, phew, Chen Tian, who was clearly still a few hundred meters away, suddenly turned into an afterimage and flashed in front of him. Thor, do you want to regain your divine powers? He looked at Thor, who looked at Thor with a puzzled gaze, and asked with a smile. It's nature. Thor narrowed his eyes, a little puzzled about Chen Tian's position and motives, but still answered truthfully. Then do you think you are now ready for sacrifice? Chen Tian continued to ask. Chapter 1 Previous Chapter 93 186 Next chapter Table of Contents.